For 4 years, Jake and I had built a life together when my father abruptly halted my monthly stipend in March. No warning, no explanation, just unanswered calls when I tried to reach him. Jake picked up on the shift in our circumstances almost instantly. We'd been living well in a cozy 2-bedroom apartment in the city center. My father's regular deposits covered rent and most of our expenses, while Jake chipped in what he could. We dined out twice weekly, took spontaneous weekend getaways, and never fretted over finances. When the funds dried up, our world tilted. I took on extra shifts to keep up with bills. Jake suggested moving to a more affordable place, but I was adamant about preserving our lifestyle. I dipped into my savings to maintain our usual rhythm while trying to unravel the mystery with my dad. Jake's behavior changed quickly. He stopped proposing fancy dinners and began preparing meals at home. He canceled our gym subscription, suggesting we jog outdoors instead. When I shopped for groceries, he scrutinized every non-essential item. I thought he was being practical, trying to help us navigate a temporary rough patch. Jake had always been savvy with money and planning, so I assumed he was stepping up to ease the strain. I was grateful for what seemed like his support. But over the next few months, Jake grew distant. He stayed out later, offering vague explanations for his whereabouts. When I asked about his day, he brushed me off with curt replies and shifted topics. He stopped planning weekend outings and seemed annoyed when I suggested activities. I chalked it up to financial stress. We were both working longer hours, spending less time together. I believed that once I sorted things out with my dad, everything would snap back to normal. Jake just needed time to adjust to our new reality. By July, Jake started mentioning his colleague, Leela, constantly. She'd bought a new car and was planning lavish trips. He seemed captivated by her lifestyle, bringing her up in every conversation. I found it irritating but didn't suspect anything deeper. I kept trying to reach my dad through the summer. He answered sporadically, keeping calls short. He claimed he was swamped and promised to call back, but never did. I left voicemails, wondering if I'd done something to upset him. He never clarified why the payment stopped. Jake grew increasingly frustrated with my family drama as time passed. He urged me to resolve whatever issue I'd caused instead of draining our savings. He accused me of being too stubborn to admit fault. After arguments about money, he started sleeping on the sofa. By October, Jake barely spoke to me except to grumble about costs. He ate meals in front of the TV, glued to his phone. When I proposed something special for my November birthday, he said we couldn't afford to celebrate. I picked up extra shifts to save for a birthday dinner at the restaurant where we had our first date. I made reservations and told Jake weeks in advance. He agreed to join me. I was thrilled at the chance to reconnect. But on Saturday evening, I waited at the restaurant for 20 minutes past our reservation. Jake was never late for important occasions. I texted him, asking where he was, but got no reply. The hostess kept checking if I wanted to order as couples filled the tables around me. Jake's brother, Ethan, walked in holding his phone. He approached my table, set his phone down without a word, and pressed play. Jake's voice blared through the speaker. "I'm not coming tonight. I've been using you for your money all along, but your dad cut you off, so there's no reason to stay. Pretending to love you for 4 years was draining. I'm with someone who's actually worth my time now. Don't reach out again." The message went on, detailing how pitiful I'd become without my family's wealth. Jake revealed he'd been seeing someone for months and was moving in with her. He said I should have fixed things with my dad instead of expecting him to live like we were broke. The entire restaurant heard every word. A waiter froze mid-step, staring. The older couple nearby looked horrified. Kids at adjacent tables asked their parents what was going on. Ethan just shrugged when I looked at him, stunned. He said to make sure everyone heard it. I grabbed my bag and left without a word. My phone pinged with a text from Jake, listing items he'd collect from our apartment. Jake wanted to shame me publicly, thinking I was worthless without my dad's money. He sent his brother to deliver the message in the most crushing way possible, ensuring everyone knew his feelings. But this fool never asked the critical question. He never wondered why my dad really stopped the payments. He just assumed I'd messed up and took it as truth. Now Jake's about to learn what happens when you humiliate someone whose father was testing whether you truly loved his daughter. First update, oh my gosh, the response to my story has been wild, and I'm cracking up at all your comments calling Jake a leech because that's exactly what this jerk turned out to be. But it gets so much worse than I first shared. After I left the restaurant, I drove home feeling like I was trapped in a nightmare. The whole stunt was so cold and calculated, sending his brother to play that message for everyone to hear. That's next-level cruelty I never saw coming. When I got to our apartment, Jake had already been there like a burglar. Half his stuff was gone, his gaming console packed up, and he took the pricey coffee machine I'd bought. He left a note on the counter listing more things he wanted to pick up with specific times he'd return. But here's where it gets absolutely bonkers. As I sat there staring at his note, trying to process the betrayal, my phone started blowing up with texts, not from Jake, but from his mother, Diane. Diane texted, asking if I was okay and saying she'd heard what happened. I thought, thank goodness, at least someone in his family has a shred of decency. I was wrong. She went on about how Jake had told her I'd been acting odd lately and that he'd found out I was cheating on him. I had to reread her messages 3 times to believe my eyes. This guy had told his whole family I'd been unfaithful, that he'd discovered my supposed affair, and that's why he ended things so dramatically, because he was devastated and betrayed. His mom was texting about how disappointed she was, thinking I was better than that, and how Jake was heartbroken but trying to stay strong. I was so furious I was shaking. 4 years of treating his family like my own. Holiday dinners, birthday celebrations, family trips. And this is what I get. Him lying to them about our breakup so he doesn't have to admit he left for someone with more cash. I called Jake right away, and he actually answered, probably thinking I'd beg him to come back. Instead, I screamed at him about his lies to his family. And this guy had the nerve to say it was easier for everyone if they thought I cheated, rather than explaining the messy financial stuff. He said his parents were asking too many questions about why he left so suddenly, and admitting it was about money would stir up drama. So he decided to make me the bad guy to avoid their judgment. Jake actually suggested I go along with it, saying it would make the breakup smoother for everyone. I hung up on him and started calling his family to tell them the truth. But guess what? Jake had gotten to them first. His mom, dad, Ethan, and sister, Sarah, all believed the same story. I was the unfaithful one, Jake was the heartbroken victim, and they didn't want to hear my version. Sarah even said Jake had shown them proof of my affair. Some texts between me and a male coworker, completely twisted to look suspicious. These were routine work chats about projects, but Jake had convinced them they were evidence of infidelity. The worst was talking to his dad, Ethan, who I'd always been close to. He'd walked me down the aisle at his second wedding when my dad was away. He'd called me his bonus daughter, made me feel like family, and now he was saying how disappointed he was in my choices and how I'd broken his son's heart. I tried explaining the restaurant incident, the voice message, and Jake leaving for Leela, but Ethan said Jake had warned them I'd try to spin lies to make myself look better. So now I wasn't just dealing with public humiliation and abandonment. I was facing an entire family who thought I was a lying cheater because Jake found it easier than admitting why he really left. But here's what Jake didn't count on. I'm not some helpless victim who'll just take this. If he wants to play dirty and ruin my reputation with his family, he's about to learn what happens when you cross someone with nothing left to lose. Jake made a critical error in his smear campaign. He forgot I had access to all our shared accounts and 4 years of evidence of our real relationship. While he was busy selling his sob story of betrayal, I was collecting proof of what actually went down. Bank records showing I covered most of our expenses. Social media photos of us happy together right up until the money stopped. Text threads where Jake never once mentioned suspicions of cheating. The best find was Jake's Instagram messages with Leela. Heart emojis, inside jokes, plans to meet up, all while he was still living with me, acting committed. So Jake wasn't just a money grubber. He was a cheater who dared to accuse me of cheating to cover his own betrayal and motives. I sent screenshots of these messages to Diane, along with a detailed account of what really happened. I explained how her son humiliated me in that restaurant, how he'd been seeing Leela behind my back, and how he'd fabricated the cheating story to hide that he left for someone he thought had better finances. Diane replied that I was obsessive and delusional, saying Jake had warned them I might become unhinged after the breakup and try to stir trouble for him and Leela. That's when I realized Jake had played this masterfully. He'd not only stolen 4 years of my life, but turned his whole family against me, painting me as the crazy ex who couldn't let go. Second update, your comments are killing me, and I have to share what happened next because this story gets even crazier, and I'm still reeling from how vile Jake truly is. After his family dismissed my evidence and called me delusional, I felt like I was losing my mind. How do you fight someone who's rewritten reality so completely that even people who have known you for years think you're lying? Then my mom called saying, "We know what Jake did to his family and we're not letting him get away with it." Turns out, my parents had been in touch with Jake's parents for years, swapping numbers at family events, following each other online, the works. My mom had seen Diane's posts about her poor son being betrayed by his cheating girlfriend and was furious. She told me she'd already called Diane to set things straight, and their talk had been explosive. Diane doubled down on Jake's lies, insisting her son would never fabricate such a story, and that my family was just covering for me. So my mom did something that made me both proud and nervous. She invited Jake's entire family over for dinner to hash out the situation like adults and uncover the truth. And shockingly, they agreed to come. Diane, Ethan, Sarah, and even Jake's grandmother, Rose, who I adored, showed up at my parents' house on Sunday, likely thinking they'd confront my family about raising a deceitful cheater. My mom later said the dinner was a battlefield from the start. Diane launched into how disappointed she was in me, saying she'd trusted me with her son's heart. Ethan ranted about welcoming me into their family and feeling betrayed. But my dad was ready. He'd printed everything: bank statements, social media screenshots, text logs, even security footage from our apartment building showing Jake's comings and goings when he was supposedly loyal to me. When my dad spread the evidence across the table, Jake's family fell silent. Diane tried to claim it could be faked, but Ethan started sifting through the documents, his face shifting. The Instagram messages between Jake and Leela were especially damning. Hundreds of messages, stretching back months before my dad stopped the payments. Heart emojis, meetup plans, Jake complaining about faking normalcy at home while plotting his exit. The worst was a message where Jake told Leela he was waiting for the perfect moment to dump me, ensuring I looked like the villain, so his family wouldn't judge him for abruptly ending a 4-year relationship. Sarah, reading over her dad's shoulder, started crying. She said she couldn't believe her brother had orchestrated something so cruel. Rose shook her head, murmuring, "This isn't the boy I raised." Then my mom dropped the bombshell. She revealed that my dad had stopped the stipend deliberately to test how Jake would treat me under pressure. She explained that my parents had suspected Jake's motives for months and wanted to see his true colors. Ethan asked my dad if this was true, and my dad confirmed it. He said they'd been tracking Jake's behavior during the test, and his response was worse than they'd ever imagined. Diane got defensive, arguing that testing a relationship was manipulative and unfair. My mom shut her down, saying they hadn't tested Jake's love. They'd tested his character, and he'd failed miserably by choosing cruelty over care. Then my dad played recordings of my phone calls with Jake, where he tore apart my character and bragged about how much better Leela was. Hearing their son's voice being so vicious about someone he'd claimed to love for 4 years crushed his family. But Jake's family wasn't ready to admit fault. Ethan argued that even if Jake mishandled things, I should have been upfront about the money situation instead of letting him think we were in a crisis. That's when I snapped. I'd been sitting there listening to them make excuses for their son's cruelty, and I couldn't take it. I stood up, shouting that Jake never asked me what was going on with my family. He just assumed I'd messed up and started treating me like trash. I told them their precious son humiliated me in front of strangers, lied to them about my cheating, and tried to ruin my reputation to hide his own infidelity and greed. Diane yelled back that I was being dramatic and that relationships fail for many reasons. She said maybe Jake made mistakes, but that didn't make him a monster. Sarah, though, was done defending her brother. She said she'd always felt something was off about how fast Jake moved on with Leela, and now it made sense. She apologized to me, saying she was ashamed of how their family had treated me. Ethan kept trying to excuse Jake, suggesting he was confused and scared about the money and hadn't handled it well. He said we were all overreacting and that young people mess up in relationships. My dad got furious. He said Jake's actions weren't a mistake, but a deliberate pattern of manipulation and cruelty that exposed his true nature. He told Ethan that any man who'd publicly shame a woman he claimed to love didn't deserve excuses or forgiveness. The argument escalated until Rose finally spoke up, telling everyone to stop shouting. She said she'd heard enough and was deeply ashamed of her grandson. She looked at me and apologized for their family's treatment. But Diane wasn't backing down. She accused my parents of being manipulative for testing the relationship in secret. My mom went off, saying any parent who raised a son capable of Jake's cruelty had no right to lecture others about manipulation. She said Jake's behavior reflected the values he'd learned at home. The dinner ended with both families yelling, Ethan defending Diane, my dad defending my mom, and me in the middle trying not to collapse. But something shifted. Jake's lies were unraveling. Sarah and Rose were on my side, and even Ethan seemed rattled by the evidence of his son's scheming. The next day, Sarah called me. She'd confronted Jake, and it was ugly. Jake tried to stick to his lies at first, but when Sarah showed him the evidence, he cracked. He admitted to her that he'd fabricated the cheating story because he was ashamed of leaving me for financial reasons. He said he panicked when his family started asking questions and thought making me the villain was easier. Even in his confession, Jake tried to justify himself, saying the relationship wasn't working anyway and the money issue was just the final push. He claimed I was better off without him and everyone should move on. Sarah said she'd never seen her brother so cold and calculating. She told him she was disgusted and that he needed to tell their parents the truth. Jake refused, saying admitting his lies now would just cause more drama and hurt people. He told Sarah I'd get over it and that airing the truth would make things worse. That's when Sarah realized her brother wasn't just a liar. He lacked any empathy or remorse for what he'd done. She said it was like talking to a stranger wearing her brother's face. She vowed to make their parents see the truth, no matter what Jake wanted. Convincing Diane and Ethan wouldn't be easy. They'd built their entire view around Jake as the victim, and admitting they were wrong meant acknowledging they treated me terribly based on lies. Meanwhile, Jake was telling Leela I was a crazy ex trying to ruin his family relationships with lies. Leela posted online about how sad it is when people can't accept a breakup and stir up drama for attention. So now I was battling Jake's family, his lies to his new girlfriend, and his victim act, all while he painted me as the unhinged ex who couldn't move on. Final update, you guys. I can't even describe what went down this week because Jake's entire world just collapsed in the most glorious way. And I'm loving every second of his pathetic downfall. Remember how Sarah was trying to convince her parents Jake had lied? She didn't have to work too hard because my dad took charge and called Ethan directly. My dad said he had critical information about Jake and they needed to meet in person. Ethan agreed, probably thinking my dad wanted to apologize or smooth things over. Nope. My dad showed up at Ethan's office with a folder of evidence that obliterated Jake's lies. It wasn't just the Instagram messages and recordings this time. My dad had been documenting Jake's behavior during the test for months, and he had proof that would shock Ethan. Photos of Jake dining at fancy restaurants with Leela while telling me we couldn't afford to eat out. Credit card records showing Jake buying gifts for Leela while whining about our budget. The worst was a recording from a family barbecue where Jake asked my mom about inheritance laws and how family wealth gets passed down. Jake had been calculating my value as a future wife based on what he thought he'd inherit. Ethan listened in stunned silence. My dad said you could see his face change as he realized his son wasn't just a liar but a scheming opportunist who'd played their whole family. But it gets crazier. After hearing the evidence, Ethan didn't just apologize. He called Jake immediately, demanding he come to his office for an urgent family meeting. Jake arrived, thinking his dad wanted to discuss the trouble I was causing. Instead, Ethan played the recordings of Jake's voice being cruel about me and scheming about my family's money. Jake's face reportedly went pale as his lies crumbled. Ethan yelled at Jake, saying he'd never been more ashamed of anyone and that Jake had betrayed their family's values. Jake tried to defend himself, arguing the test was unfair and his reaction was reasonable given the situation. He said everyone was blowing it out of proportion and that relationships sometimes end messily. Ethan told Jake he was moving out of the apartment immediately because he wasn't paying rent for someone so cruel. Jake panicked, unable to afford the place alone. Ethan said that was Jake's problem. Then Ethan said he was taking back the car he'd been helping Jake pay for, refusing to support someone with such poor character. Jake started begging, claiming he'd learned his lesson and would do better. Ethan said it was too late. Jake had shown his true self, and there were no second chances for that level of deceit. Within 24 hours, Jake went from a nice apartment and reliable car to being essentially homeless and carless. Too proud to tell Leela the truth, Jake scrambled to find a place to stay without admitting his family had cut him off. According to Sarah, Jake's been crashing with his old college friend, Max, telling Leela he's temporarily between apartments while searching for a better place. He's been using ride shares, claiming his car's in the shop. But Jake's lies started unraveling when Leela wanted to see his place and meet his family. He kept making excuses, and she grew suspicious. That's when Jake made the dumbest move of his sorry life. He started calling me, begging me to help him explain things to Leela. He wanted me to back his story about our breakup to make him seem less unstable to his new girlfriend. When he called the first time, I was so shocked I nearly hung up. But then I saw my chance to ruin him completely. I stayed on the line, letting him grovel. Jake spouted his usual nonsense about making mistakes but wanting us to move on maturely. He said he just needed me to talk to Leela once to clear up some misunderstandings about our relationship. I laughed in his face. I told Jake the only misunderstanding was him thinking I'd ever help him after what he'd done. I called him a pathetic loser who'd wrecked his own life through greed and cruelty. Jake got mad, demanding I help because we'd meant something for 4 years. He said I owed him basic decency, and I was being spiteful by refusing. That's when I unloaded. I told Jake he'd thrown away 4 years of love for money that wasn't even gone, that he'd humiliated me publicly, that he'd lied to his family about me cheating. I said he deserved every consequence. Jake started crying, begging me to remember our good times. He said he knew he'd messed up but wasn't a bad person deep down. I told Jake the test had shown exactly who he was, someone who'd abandon and destroy someone he claimed to love when it suited him. Jake got desperate, offering to tell Leela the truth about our breakup if I'd cover for his living situation. He said he'd admit to his family he lied about me cheating if I helped him hide being kicked out. I told Jake I wouldn't help him deceive another woman like he deceived me. I said Leela deserved to know who she was dating. Jake started screaming, calling me a vindictive jerk who couldn't accept our relationship was over. He said I was trying to ruin his life out of jealousy. I laughed harder, saying I wasn't destroying his life. He'd done that himself. I said I was grateful he'd shown his true colors before I wasted more time on him. Jake kept calling from different numbers after I blocked him, each call more desperate. He offered money, then threatened to say I was harassing him, then went back to begging. In our last call, Jake was a wreck. He said Leela was asking questions he couldn't answer, and Max was tired of him crashing on his couch. He didn't know what to do if his lies kept collapsing. I told Jake he should have thought about consequences before being such a cruel, scheming jerk. I said he'd made his choices and now had to live with them. The best part, Leela got my number somehow and called me. She said Jake had mentioned me as his ex, and she wanted to clear up some things she'd heard. I was thrilled. I told Leela I'd happily share the truth about Jake and our relationship. I laid it all out. The restaurant humiliation, the lies to his family, the months of him treating me like dirt when he thought I was broke. Leela was silent for a long time, then said Jake's version of our breakup was totally different. He'd told her I was unstable and obsessive, and he'd ended things for his own safety. I sent Leela screenshots of Jake's Instagram messages flirting with her while living with me. I explained the test my parents did, and how Jake failed it by choosing cruelty over loyalty. Leela said she was starting to see why Jake was so evasive about his living situation and family. She thanked me for my honesty and said she had a lot to think about. The next day, Sarah called, laughing because Jake had shown up at his parents' house, crying and begging them to take him back. He admitted Leela dumped him after talking to me and that he had nowhere to go. Diane and Ethan told Jake he'd made his choices and had to face the consequences. They said he'd ruined every relationship in his life through selfishness and wouldn't enable him anymore. Jake's now staying in cheap motels, burning through his meager savings while figuring out his next move. But here's what makes me laugh hardest. Jake still doesn't know about the inheritance my dad mentioned. He threw away a relationship with someone whose family could have set him up for life, all for someone with a slightly better paycheck than me. My parents restarted the monthly stipend, by the way, not because I need it, but to remind me that real love doesn't abandon you in tough times. Jake's learning that lesson the hard way, and I couldn't be happier. Thanks, everyone. Watching the trash take itself out has been incredible.